Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time, Masechet Bava Batra. This is our 6th class, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 37 to 43. So if you remember from last week, we're in the middle of discussing making a Chazaka. Again, Chazaka means proving ownership based on being on property, right? Either it's a house or a field for 3 years. So last week we had mentioned that it doesn't necessarily have to be 3 years, but let's say it's a field of trees, meaning an orchard. So you can actually make a chazaka in 1 year if you have 3 different crops, right? But the idea is that there were 3 different opportunities where the owner could have come and said, this is his land, and he didn't come, and therefore the person says, I own the land. If a person ate the produce from 10 trees in the first year, and then another 10 trees the second year, and another 10 trees the third year, so then he has a chazaka for the whole orchard, meaning it doesn't have to be that he eats from every single tree every single year. However, that's only if the other 20 trees didn't produce any fruit. But if the whole orchard produced fruit and he didn't harvest all the fruit, so then it does not create a chazaka, because that's not the way a farmer would harvest their crop, right? Meaning if you have an apple orchard, you're going to pick all the apples every year. You're not going to leave half of them for, to rot. That's not the way it works. Okay, so now we're going to have some cases. Again, the way it's going to work is there's an owner of the property and a person who is using the property, and that person claims that they have been there for 3 years, right? So that's the chazaka. Okay, so now we have a case sold to person and the trees to another person. Now this is complicated, right? If you have a field or an orchard and you sold the land to one person and the trees to the other person, so then what happens? So the Gemara says you could do this, right? So you could sell one to one person, one to the other. And the person who got the trees only gets the trees, but not the land. Meaning that if the tree dies, so the land guy can tell him, okay, now you're out of here because you don't own the land, you only own the trees. And therefore that person can't plant a new tree. Or no, maybe the case is that the person bought the tree and the land that's under the tree, right? The tree is on land. So he gets that land that's right under the tree, and then the other person gets all the land that's not under the trees. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva says that when you sell your land, you do it, in Hebrew, the word is be'ayin yafa, right? You do it generously. And we're going to see that there's a machluket later on in the Masechet. When someone sells something, do they do it be'ayin yafa? Do they do it generously? Or do they do it be'ayin ra'ah, meaning in a stingy way? So Rabbi Akiva says when you sell your land, you do it generously. And therefore, right, you'll give the land that's maybe around the tree, right? So this case comes up later on in the Masechet about selling a pit, again, like a water cistern, that maybe that's when you're generous and you give the land around it. Or right, you don't sell the land around it, and then you need to like buy back a path of land to get to the cistern. Chachamim say ayin ra'ah, that a person is usually stingy when they sell their property, and therefore he's going to leave himself a path to get to the pit. However, maybe it's different with trees. Again, that when the tree is on the ground, it weakens the ground. So we say that for sure when he sells it, he retained the property around the trees, because again, right, otherwise the field guy is going to tell him to take the trees away. Let's say there were two buyers, one for the trees and one for the land, right? But that was the case that we just said. But if only one buyer buys the land, so now the seller can retain the land under the trees that he didn't sell, right? Again, he's selling the land, but not his trees. He's holding on to his trees. So then we say that he does retain the land that's under the trees. If he only sells the trees, according to Rabbanan, the seller keeps the rights to all the land, and therefore the person who bought the trees only get the trees. If the trees are packed very close together, so if you sell the trees, you don't get the land, because the assumption is that that's not the way you plant trees. Right? When you plant trees, you need to give them space. If they're very close together, it must be that you're just like, I don't know what the word is, Elisa can tell us, but right, you're just like getting them to grow, and then you're going to uproot them and move them to where you're going to plant them later on, right? So like in a nursery, right? You might have trees all together, but that's not the way you're going to plant them on the field. You're going to separate them, and therefore in that case, you don't get the land, you just get the trees. Let's say a person sold a palm tree. So again, he gets the land that's right under the tree. And if the tree gets knocked down or if it dies, he can replace the tree, even though he didn't buy the land underneath it. But if it dies after 3 years, right, that's only if it dies after 3 years because he has a chazaka, he owns now the land. If he only bought the rights to the tree and not the land, so what should the owner do, right? The owner should make a claim within the 3 years to the guy, and he says to him, right, don't forget, you only own the tree, you don't own the land. And therefore, when the tree dies, he gets the land back. Okay, Daf 38. We now have the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah tells us that there are 3 separate regions that have to do with Chazaka. And we'll see what this means. First, we'll see what the regions are. Yehuda, that's like, I guess, from the center of Israel to the south. The Galil, that's the north. And Ever Hayarden, that's the east, right? The eastern side of the Jordan River. So why is this important? So the Mishnah explains that if the owner of the property, if the owner was in one region, but the land was in another region, so then the person who's occupying the land cannot say, oh, look, I was here for 3 years and nobody came to say anything. Because it's not like nowadays where you could just jump in your car and go wherever you want, right? These are 3 separate regions, and it's not common, it wasn't common for people to travel from one region to another. You have to be in the same region so that the owner could have made a claim within 3 years, and the fact that he doesn't proves that you own the land. Or the Gemara says another opinion, the Mishnah says, no, 3 years, when you get 3 years to get a chazaka, it's when the owner lives far away, right? And it says like when the owner lives in Spain. Why? Because it takes a year for him to find out that you're on his land, and then he hears about it, and then it takes him a year, and it takes a year to know, it takes a year to get to Spain, and then it takes him a year to come back to Israel to say, what are you doing on my property? So that's when you get 3 years, when it's far. So if you are in 3 different areas in Israel, so then 3 years is plenty of time for you to realize someone is on your property and for you to go to their house, to the property and say, what are you doing here? This is mine. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain, right? Does the first opinion say that you can make a claim not in front of the occupant. This is a big machloket. Remember, what's the case? The owner needs to say, hey, what's he doing on my property? I own the property. So we're going to see right now there's a machloket. Does he have to actually go to the land and say to Shimon, hey, what are you doing on my land? Or can Reuven just say, and we'll see today all the different parameters, can he just tell two people, hey, I heard that Shimon is on my land. I don't know what he's doing there because it's mine and I didn't sell it to him. And the assumption is that even though he doesn't say it in front of Shimon, we know how people like to talk. And eventually the claim is going to make it to Shimon because people are going to talk. So again, one side of the machloket is you can make the claim not in front of the occupant. Another opinion is no, you have to do it in front of the occupant. Okay, so now the Gemara asks, right, does the first opinion of the Mishnah say that you can make the claim not in front of the occupant? Because of why, right? Why could you make a claim not in front of Shimon? Because he'll eventually hear about it. So what does it matter if you live in Yehuda or in the Galil? It doesn't matter. He'll eventually hear about it. So the Gemara says you can make a claim to somebody else, meaning not to Shimon, but to somebody else. But in a time of hostility, when people are not traveling from one region to another, then that claim doesn't work because he's not going to hear about it because people aren't going to be traveling, so people aren't going to be talking. So then the Gemara says you cannot make a chazaka on a field if the person ran away, right? And the Gemara is going to explain what this means, ran away, right? But the idea is if someone runs away, they can't come back to make the claim. So you can't say, I was here and he didn't say anything because he couldn't say anything, right? Or maybe you can because he doesn't, again, as we said, he doesn't have to come back to make the claim. He can just make it in front of two other people. So we say, no, right? How do you make a claim? You have to make a claim in front of two people who are able to go to Shimon, to the person who's occupying the land, and tell him, right? Or even if they can't go, don't worry, because they're going to call their best friend, who's going to call their friend, and they're going to call two friends, and eventually the person will hear about it. So the halacha is you cannot have a chazaka from a person who ran away, but you can make, but you can make a claim not in front of the occupant. And now the Gemara explains, when is the person running away? So if he ran away because he owes someone money, so you can definitely make a claim because he's sitting somewhere else, but he's okay. But if he's running away because of a charge of murder, so then you can't make the claim because he's not, he's on the run. So he's not going to have time to think about these things, and therefore there's no chazaka. Okay, so as we said, you have to make this claim in front of two witnesses. And what do you have to say? That person, right, Shimon is a thief, right? He stole my land because he's on my property and he stole it, right? So therefore, right, I never sold it to him. I never told him he could be there. He's not allowed to be on my property. Okay, daf 39. Let's say the owner says, listen, Bob and Bill, I need to tell you something. This guy, stole my property, but I don't want you to tell him. Now remember, the whole point of him making the claim is so that Shimon, who's on the land, will hear about it. So what if he says, don't tell him? So we say that's not a valid claim because he told him not to tell anybody. Or the Gemara, I think, very sensitively says, okay, all right, you're going to say don't tell him, but you know what? They can tell their friend who's going to tell their friend, and eventually it's going to happen. So it is a valid claim. Let's say the witnesses say, we're not going to tell him. So again, that's invalid because the whole point is that they should be able to hear him. Or again, no, it's valid because they say they're not going to tell him, but they're going to tell somebody else. And really, he will find out in the end. Let's say he says to them, I don't want you to tell anyone. So then it's invalid. However, if the witnesses say they won't tell anyone, so then it's either invalid because they're not going to tell anyone, or again, like using psychology, right? If someone says, I'm going to tell you something, but you're not allowed to tell anyone, that's very different than someone saying themselves, you know what, I'm not going to tell anybody, right? So, and then you're like, fine, maybe I'll tell one person, or maybe I'll tell another person. So the Gemara says, even if they say they're not going to tell anybody, eventually they're going to tell us someone, and the claim is valid. Okay, so our Mishnah seems to suggest that really the owner should come back. But again, the Gemara is saying it's not that you have to come back, but it's good advice, meaning that's the proper way to do it. You come back and you tell the person, you're on my land. Second. Okay, let's continue. We said you have to make this claim in front of two people. Another opinion is it has to be in front of three people. Now, if those numbers sound familiar, they imply two different things. Two people are the number of witnesses that make a valid claim. Three people are judges, right? When you sit in judgment, it's three people. So now the Gemara is going to explain that maybe it's not about judges versus witnesses. Maybe it's about, and again, like this is like psychological, how many people do you need to tell for a rumor to begin to spread, right? Are two people enough or three people, right? Or maybe it's not about rumor spreading, but once I tell three people, it officially becomes public knowledge, and then you can talk about it, right? We actually have this law when it comes to lashon hara, speaking ill, about someone. Like if there's something that's public knowledge, so then you can repeat it because like everybody knows about it. So here the Gemara says maybe that's the difference between 2 and 3, or maybe it's because of witnesses versus them like sitting in judgment. It becomes almost like a court. Okay, and then again, to make sure that it becomes public knowledge. Let's say, right, so now there's a story that a person made a protest every year. Year 1, year 2, year 3. So then they tell him, listen, you don't have to protest every single year. You can just protest once every 3 years. Or maybe you only have to do it once, even if it's for 4 or 5 or 6 years. As long as you made the claim within the first 3 years, maybe that's enough. And the law is, the halacha is, no, you actually need to protest once every 3 years. So therefore, you have to make sure that you say something once every 3 years. If the owner protests differently each time, so what does that mean? Right? He says, oh, Shimon, he totally stole that from me. And then the next time he says, you know what, Shimon totally tricked my father into giving it to him. And basically, if every time he makes a claim, he says a different story, so then he is not believed, and it's not a valid protest. And also, the Gemara tells us at the top of Daf 40, you do not need to tell the people to write down the protest, because if it's done in front of two people, that's enough. And that's valid, and that is a valid claim. Okay, next, the Gemara teaches us, since we're talking about telling people about things, the Gemara talks about the concept of a moda'ah. Moda'ah is when a person tells two people that he's being forced to do something, right? So he's being forced to do something against his will. He doesn't want to do it. So he tells two people, listen, guys, I just want to tell you that the court is making me do this and I don't want to do it. And in that case, again, he doesn't need to tell them to write it down. They're going to write it down on their own. Also, if there's an admission, if a person admits something, in that case, you do need you need to tell them to write it down because it's detrimental for him. So therefore, because he's admitting to have done something wrong, you want to make sure that they write it down so that later on he can't say, oh, no, I never said that. Also, when you make a kinyan, when you make an acquisition, you don't need to tell them to write it down as long as it's done in front of two people. When you're certifying a document, that needs to be done in front of three people, again, because it's a court case, it's judges, as opposed to when you buy something, it's in front of two people because it's not like a court proceeding. It's just witnesses that are there. What was the idea about the person being forced? The issue is that this person wasn't listening to the court. Therefore, we make sure that we write things down, and the witnesses need to know who forced who, and therefore they have to write everything down so they know exactly what's going on. When you're giving a get or a gift, right, these things are one-sided. Therefore, you don't need to explain in a document what's going on. But if you were forced into a sale, right, again, you don't need a moda'ah. You don't have to write it down that you were forced because maybe it's not true. Because again, don't forget with a sale, even if you're being forced to sell something, you are getting money. And then the Gemara says, no, with a sale, you do need a moda'ah. Because again, it's not clear who's forcing who and what is going on. Let's say someone gives a gift in secret, right? There's like a secret gift document. So the Gemara tells us you can't use this to collect the gift or money because why was it a secret gift document? Like, why would you do that as a secret? And then the Gemara gives a story of a man who wrote all of his property to a woman so that she would marry him, right? Basically, he says, I want to marry you. She's like, fine, if you give me all of your money, I'll marry you. But he didn't really want to give all his money. So what did he do? Like, he secretly gave his money to his son, and then he like publicly gave the money to her, right? So, right, so right, the son says he wrote the property to him, but it was in secret. So the question is, who gets the property? So the Gemara says, no. Her document isn't valid because he didn't really mean it. He doesn't want to give her the money. So therefore, that case is not a proof about this like secret document. If a person wrote one document in secret and one in public, which sounds like the case we just had, right? The secret one is not valid because again, why are you writing one in secret and one in public? Therefore, if you did write a gift document, it should be done publicly so that everybody sees what you're doing, and therefore it will be public, and therefore it'll be valid. Okay, Daf 41. So the Mishnah tells us that if there's a Chazaka, but there's no claim, it isn't a valid Chazaka. What does this mean? Again, right, Reuven comes to Shimon and says, what are you doing on my land? And Shimon says, what are you talking about? I've been here 3 years. That's not valid. He needs to say, what are you talking about? I bought this land from you and I've been here for 3 years. Meaning, in Jewish law, we don't believe that squatters have rights just because they have been on the property. It needs to be that he got it as a gift, he got it, he bought it, and he was there for 3 years. That's the way it works. So now the Gemara explains, right? And if an owner comes and says, why are you on my land? And he says, because no one told me I couldn't be here. that's not a chazaka. That's not valid. He has to give back the land. But if he says, I bought it from you, that's a chazaka. Or if he says, I got a gift from you or from your father, all of those cases are a valid chazaka. If he got it as an inheritance, right? So he says, what do you mean, why am I here? My father left it to me in the will. So then he does not need to claim anything because he doesn't know how his father got it. So as long as he says he got it from his father, that's a valid chazaka. He doesn't have to make another claim. So now the Gemara is going to explain this. Again, what's the case? So the Gemara is going to say, in our first case in our Mishnah, when he says, no one told me I couldn't be here, the Gemara says, wait a minute, that's really weird. Why would someone say that? Maybe what happened is that he really bought the land, but he lost the document, the bill of sale, and therefore he makes this silly claim because he's scared that if he says he bought it, the guy's going to be like, really, you bought it? Let me see your document. And he doesn't have the document. So he doesn't want to admit that he bought it. But the Gemara says, if you make this silly claim, you can't stay on the property. And it's not a valid claim. Okay, now we have a few stories where a person's fence fell down, right? There's a flood and the fence fell down. And when he put it back up, he accidentally took some of his neighbor's property. He didn't do it on purpose, but he did it by accident. So Reb Nachman told him, okay, you need to move it back, right? You can't just do that. You can't leave it there. So then he claimed that, wait a minute, I have a chazaka because the neighbor actually helped me put up the fence and the neighbor didn't say anything. So maybe I can keep the land. Now, this is not an issue of 3 years. Here, the issue is that if the owner actually helps you on the land, even that day, it's like a chazaka because he's proving that he doesn't care that you have the land. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a chazaka because maybe just like you made the mistake of where you put the fence, so too maybe the neighbor made a mistake, right? Nobody, right? They didn't realize where the boundary of the backyard was. And therefore, just because he helped you with the fence doesn't mean that he agreed that you can have his property. Okay, there's the same case of, again, the person taking some of the land, and here it was like a field. So the owner brings like the neighbor brings one witness that says, oh, he moved the fence 2 rows into my field. And another witness comes and says he moved it 3 rows into his field. So Rabbi Yehuda says, tell the neighbor he needs to move it back 2 rows. And now, right, we have a discussion in the Gemara. What happens if we have 2 witnesses that contradict each other, but one of the claims is included in the other one, right? One says 2 and one says 3. But when you say 3, it's at least 2. So one opinion is that you can combine those because theoretically, now 2 people are saying 2, right? Just one of them is saying 2 plus 1. Another opinion, and that's what Rabbi Yehuda said, right? Move it 2, because they both agree that he moved it at least 2. But another opinion is no. One says 2, one says 3. They're contradicting each other. Therefore, you throw out the whole case because they're contradicting each other. So that's a machloket. And here it seems that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you do combine them if they combine. Okay, right? Again, like if a person says he stole oranges and he stole apples, we don't say, they all mean fruit, right? That doesn't work. But 2 and 3 can combine. Okay, next case, a person was living in a house for 4 years and he claims he bought it from Levi, right? Who bought it from the owner, right? So in all these cases, Reuven is the owner, Shimon is the one who lives there, and now we're adding Levi. Right, so Shimon buys it from Levi, who he thought bought it from Reuven. So the judge said that if you can prove that Levi, right, that's the seller, if he lived in the house even for one day, so then it's okay because that proves Levi bought it from Reuven. So now Shimon can buy it from Levi. The Gemara says, wait a minute, why do you have to prove that, right? We know that people buy real estate all the time just to flip it. Just because Levi didn't live there doesn't mean he didn't buy it. So then we say, if maybe you have to say, if the person said he saw him buy it from the original owner, so then we believe him, right? So Shimon says, why did I buy it from Levi? I saw Levi buy it from Reuven. And here, if you guys remember the principle of Migo, the principle of Migo is, right, if you had a better lie that you could have told, and you tell a weaker lie, the Gemara says we believe you, right? Because again, if you're going to lie, you might as well lie the best lie that you can give. So I'm going to believe you if you give the weaker lie. Again, it doesn't work so well in a society where people lie all the time. But in the time of the Gemara, again, I'm sure we still say migo, but here it's saying like, if you're gonna lie, you might as well like go all the way. So here the Gemara says, because you said you saw Levi buy it from Shimon, from Reuven, we believe you. Why? Because you could have said, I bought it from Reuven directly. The fact that you didn't means that that you're not lying. Migo is the term in Aramaic for this statement, right? Almost like a malo lishaker, but it's not exactly the same, right? Malo lishaker means like, why should he lie? He doesn't have anything to lose. So this one is, if he's gonna lie, so he doesn't, right? He would have made a better lie. Okay, let's go back. We said in the Mishnah that if he inherited it, he doesn't need to make a claim. However, he does need to prove that his father lived in the house, right? Because if he's saying he got it from his father, he needed to have lived there at least one day. Now, the Gemara asks, what if Levi was seen on the property, but he wasn't living there? Is that still okay? So some say yes, and another opinion is no. Okay, the next idea is we talked about a person being on the property for 3 years. Now the Gemara tells us you can actually have 3 different buyers, right, one after the other, can combine to make a chazaka, right? So, right, each one bought the land and used it for a year, right? So Shimon bought it, and then Levi bought it, and then Yehuda bought it. Each one used it for a year. So then, if they have a document to show that they bought it, so then they can claim, right? Reuven can't say, what are you guys doing on my property, right? Or to Yehuda at the end. You can't say, what are you doing on my property? And therefore, right, the fact that there was a document creates like this call, this rumor, everyone knows who bought the land, and therefore it works. Okay, let's say, and now Daf 42 talks about the power of a document versus the power of doing a sale in front of witnesses, right? So with a regular sale, right, you should have a document, right? Let's say there were only witnesses present at the, so we have a sale versus a loan, right? So if you only have witnesses present at the time of a loan, so then you can't collect from property that had a lien on it. Because just because I have 2 witnesses there doesn't mean everybody knows about this loan, and therefore you can only collect from property that is, I don't know if you can call property liquid, but property that's available, that he still owns, not property that was sold. So then we say, no, it's not necessarily witnesses versus a document, but it's going to be loan versus a sale. With a loan, right, a person who takes out a loan wants to keep it quiet, right? He doesn't want people to know that he's taking out a loan. Therefore, it's generally done privately. But a sale is very public. You want people to know that you're buying this field. So therefore, it's a little bit different. Okay, let's say the father was on the field for a year or 2 years, and then the son was on it for a year or two, meaning neither was there for 3. Those years do combine, right? The father and the son can combine to create a chazaka. Let's say, right, the person ate from the field while the father owned it for 1 year, and then for 2 years, when the son owned it, again, that person ate from it. So then that's a valid chazaka, meaning this is the flip case, right? Meaning who's creating the chazaka? In the first case, it was the father and the son creating the chazaka, being the occupants. Now we're saying the father and the son are the owners of the land, and the occupant, if he ate from the property, 1 year from the father and the next 2 years from the son, that also creates a valid chazaka. If the son sold all of his father's property, so then it's not necessarily a claim against the person who's like occupying the field. But if the son sold just the field, that's the biggest type of claim to say I own it, right? If I'm selling something, obviously I own it, and the person doesn't have a chazaka. Okay, next Mishnah. A craftsman cannot make a chazaka on an item that he's given to fix or create, right? A craftsman gets an object to fix. It doesn't matter if it was in his house for 3 years, he doesn't get to keep it, right? Because again, people bring him things to fix all the time. Partners cannot make a chazaka on the lands that they share because he has the rights to the land and you have the rights to the land. So to a sharecropper, right? The sharecropper is allowed to be on the field. He uses the field, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's his. And the manager of a field, an apotropos, also cannot make a chazaka on property that he's managing. Because obviously, right, if you have someone who manages an apartment, he can't say afterwards, oh, you saw that I went into that apartment, and therefore it's mine. No, it was your job to go into the apartment. Okay, a husband can't make a chazaka on his wife's property or vice versa, right? Because they each have rights to use it, doesn't mean that they own it. So too, a father and son are not allowed to make a chazaka on each other's property. But if you give a gift to someone, or brothers who divide an estate, or if you're taking possession from a convert who doesn't have any inheritors, so then you can make a chazaka. And how do you make a chazaka? If you locked the door, right? If you put a padlock on the door, if you put up a fence, or if you breached the fence, that shows that you have rights to the property, and that's called chazaka. So now the Gemara is going to explain that, right, again, one partner can't make a chazaka for, right, taking the land from another partner, but some say actually they can, and they can actually testify for each other, even though, and we'll talk about this in a minute, they're biased, right? If we're in business together, then, right, testifying for your business partner seems like, right, in Hebrew we say nogea b'davar, right? You're involved, so how can you testify for that person? So now the Gemara is going to explain, right? Maybe the partner can make a chazaka if he's using the whole field for 3 years, because that's not usually the way partners split a field, right? Either you get it 1 year and I get it 1 year, or you get half and I get half. But if one person was there for the whole time, maybe he can make a chazaka, right? And you can't if it was only half for 3 years, or maybe the opposite, right? The partner can make a chazaka on half the field because that's not standard, because usually you don't have the same half for 3 years, and therefore you could make a chazaka even if it's a half. Or maybe it depends how big the field was. If it's big enough to split, right? And if the partner was on the whole field, then why didn't they split it? It must be that he gets to keep the land. Right? The partner can take produce that is ready to be harvested, right? Because again, he's allowed to be there, and he gets, right, all the improvements that he did to the land. Okay, our last daf for today, daf 43. We said that one partner can testify for the other partner. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, how could that be? Right? But wait, you can't trust them because he's involved. So maybe only if he writes like a document that says, I don't have any claim on this land, right? Like basically, I'm giving you all the rights to the land, and now I'm going to testify that I own the land. Then the Gemara says, wait a minute, that's not enough because he needs to give over his share of the land. And then the Gemara says, wait a minute, that's also not enough because if a creditor comes and says, hey, you owe me money, so then he's going to take it away, and the person left standing with the field is going to be out all that money. So rather, right, maybe it has to be that he still has his share of the land, and therefore, if it's taken away, he can give testimony because he has, not only does he have interest in it, but he has responsibility towards it. So therefore, right, the conclusion is that he has to give up his share. He has to do like an actual kinyan, an actual action, and he also has to say that if the land is taken, I share responsibility to pay back my share of that field, and then he can testify. But if one partner removes himself from the field and then testifies, maybe we don't believe him because maybe it's, like in all the movies, maybe they made this deal. Oh, you say you don't own it, and then you testify for me, and then when we finish in court, I'll give you back the land, right? So maybe we don't believe them. And now the Gemara gives different cases of when does a person, right, either the witness or a judge, need to recuse themselves because they are biased, right? They're nogea b'davar, right? So the Gemara gives a few cases. The Gemara gives a few cases. Let's say the Sefer Torah, the Torah scroll, was stolen from a city, and then they catch the thief. So the people of the city are not allowed to be the witnesses or the judges because they were affected by this clause, by this theft. Why? Because in the time of, probably until very recently, in most communities, people collectively owned the Torah, meaning everybody gave a certain amount of money so that the community could buy a Torah, right? So if everybody gave money, right, and they have to hear from this Torah every day, every Shabbat and twice during the week, they're like partners, and therefore they can't like give up their rights to this case. Another case, a dying person says, I want you to give a certain amount of money to the people of the city. So then the people of the city can't be the judges or the witnesses because they're benefactors of the beneficiaries of this statement. Right? They're all biased. And maybe then the Gemara says, well, maybe this is again about a Sefer Torah, right? He's giving money so that he wants to buy a Sefer Torah for the whole city, and then it's similar, right? Let's say he says, give money to all the poor people of the city. So then maybe it's the poor judges that are not allowed to judge the case. And then the Gemara says, why can't they just remove themselves from the city, right? And then they can judge the case. We say, no, maybe we don't trust that. Or the case is, again, they're buying a Sefer Torah, and again, it involves everybody in the city. Or maybe the case is that they're living in a city where everybody needs to support the poor. So if everybody needs to support the poor, so then again, you have vested interest for this money to go to the poor people because then you have to give less money. And the Gemara says, well, maybe it's a case where everyone has to give a certain amount, and therefore you can give up your share and then you can testify. Okay. The Gemara tells us that partners can be a shomer sachar. If you remember, we had this concept of a guardian, someone who's watching for pay. They're a paid watchman. So one could say, wait a minute, how could a partner be a paid watchman? Half of this thing belongs to him. So the Gemara says, no, it works, because what do they say? You watch, right? You watch the whatever, right? The cows. You watch the cows for me today, and I'll watch the cows for you tomorrow. So like he's a paid watchman on the other person's time. So that does work. If a person sold a house or a field, he can't testify for the buyer because, again, he has vested interest. Because usually when you buy a house or a field, you give a guarantee, right? I give a guarantee that, if someone comes and takes the field from you, I'll give you another field. So then you can't testify that the buyer bought the land because you have a vested interest in this property. But if you sold a cow or a garment, this is movable objects, so then you can testify because there's no warranty on these movable objects. Or no, the Gemara says that maybe this is a very specific case. What's the case? The case is, it's a little complicated. So the case is Reuben stole land from Shimon, and then he sold it to Levi. Okay. Now Yehuda comes and says, how do you have, Levi, how do you have this land? It's my land. No, it's not Yehuda's land, right? So Shimon, again, Shimon is the original owner. Shimon can't come and testify that the land is Levi's, because it's not Levi's, right? So why would he do that? And we saw this last week, actually, because sometimes the owner will say, oh, it's his land. Why? Because I know that I can convince that guy to give me back my land. So I'll say that it's his, and then next week I'll come and I'll take it back. So we don't believe Shimon, meaning Shimon, the original owner, is not allowed to testify because, again, he has vested interest. He wants the property in different places, and therefore we don't let him testify. We're actually going to stop here, and we are going to finish up this case next week. It just keeps going and going. So we are going to stop here. I'm happy to open it up to any questions. So I'm going to stop the recording right now, wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a meaningful Tisha B'Av. Be'ezrat Hashem, we will meet next week at our regular time on Wednesday night. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we will just have only good news. Okay.